Two simple ideas that really stood out for me in the book. One, you made the statement, there's a lot about what we can do and how we treat others that needs to change. And this need to move from design for to design with. And you've shared a number of considerations in terms of helping us design better teams. What questions should we be asking ourselves as business leaders to ensure we design truly inclusive organizations?
Yeah, I think ultimately what I really speak to in the book is the leadership tact that's necessary for the moment, as well as like what the future is going to require. And the two things I'll say, the first is that the precedent of what has informed and influenced companies, I think the business community at large has sort of dominated that conversation. Maybe in recent decades, arguably, like technologists have garnered some share of that conversation too, but design is the youngest to the table. So that's one thing that we need to be mindful of, that there's a lot of education necessary across disciplines. The second thing I'll say is that the leadership tact, in the book, I describe the spectrum between, on one end, there's perhaps management approaches that feed, or behaviors that feed into the status quo. If things are working the way they are, they're fine. Let's just move things forward, and I gotta keep the ship afloat. But that tends to lead to gatekeeping behaviors on one extreme. The other extreme is, how can we actually be in service and ensure that we're like evolving our teams to achieve a higher bar? We're evolving our teams to ensure that they're as inclusive as they can be, so that we ultimately will mirror the world at some point, at some ideal future state. And so how do we become in service to our teams as they serve stakeholders? And so the leadership tact is different. One feeds into the status quo, one feeds into tracking against the value criteria of your stakeholders and ensuring your teams can actually respond with relevance to that by being inclusive and diverse.
In the spirit of innovation, one of the things that you spend some time on is actually defining what innovation means. And that it's not necessarily just the introduction of something new, but it should also be considered within commercial success across a few dimensions. So, in our evolving society and business context, where you have, this move maybe from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism, or some people say, the focus on triple bottom line or sustainability, how would you define or redefine commercial success?
Yeah, I think that notion has definitely changed. Excellent question. I think to one of these visual metaphors that my mentor, who wrote the foreword, Dr. John Maida, he brings this notion of the infinity loop to life, where we tend to be in this trap of like a marketer is always marketing, and then leads to consumers always consuming. And thanks to computation, that's only speeding up. It's like getting crazy, and clearly harm is being done. So for anything to be commercially successful, like it needs to be shrouded now in this greater respect for the ecology of like how are we not just dealing with like a new idea and turning it into an innovation, or through the lens of desirability, feasibility, business viability, but are we strategically aligned? Are we looking at corporate responsibility? Are we looking at inclusive design to ensure there's no harmful mismatches between like our product or solution and the people that we're serving? And then what is the footprint impact? Like, is this a systemic, respectful value proposition, or is the value proposition going to defeat itself? Because we need to care, like our consumers, our stakeholders care about the environment too, even more so. And they're going to look to like, how is that new service that we're launching respectful or not? So we all have to care now. And commercial success means so much more now than it did a couple of years ago.